What's up, everybody, and welcome to Real Time, where we are live talking about film and television and everything in between. And today I'm very excited to have today's guest, somebody who is a pioneer in filmmaking and using that medium to reaching out and helping others, Mr. Mujahid Fletcher. Let's dive right into it. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Mustafa Talib here with Cinema King Productions. And like I said, today I'm very excited to have none other than somebody who has been a pioneer in utilizing his filmmaking skills and media in general to reaching out and helping others and guiding them to the truth of justice, the truth of faith. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Mujahid Fletcher. There you are, bro. You are on. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. How's it going, Mustafa?
Doing fantabulous. How are you, my friend?
Under the given circumstances, we're good, alhamdulillah. We're excellent.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to, speak with me and, inshallah, share some beautiful knowledge, your story of how you got into the filmmaking world. And like I said, using that to reach out and help others and help them find the truth in themselves. So, first, could you talk a little bit about yourself? Your background, your upbringing, and things like that.
So, my name's Jaime Mujahid Fletcher. I came to America when I was 8 years old. My parents are from Colombia, and we had lived in Colombia and Venezuela before coming to America.
Mm-hmm.
By the age of 13, I realized in middle school that movies influenced a lot of our environment, and one day I thought that I was going to um, learn how to use that medium. So, eventually, after embracing Islam and after living in Latin America um, back as a teenager, and after going through a lot of turbulent times, my uh, upbringing, there was a lot of gangs and drugs and a lot of things in the environment that
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot to say. So by the time I became Muslim, I went to the Art Institute of Houston, studied film and media, and have been utilizing it towards social justice. That's my take on things. In regards
Mm-hmm.
to, I'm trying to wrong some I'm trying to right some wrongs, and I'm trying to
Yes.
utilize that sort of medium. And Islam in Spanish is just one of the streams of content that I've been very fortunate to produce for. But I've produced for Comcast, ESPN, for Brother Hakim Elijah, for so many different
Mm-hmm.
causes, documentaries out of Hollywood through an organization that I'm affiliated with over there,
Mm-hmm.
and been on films with Eric Roberts, Julia Roberts' brother, and
Yep.
assistant directed. And anyway, have worked inside of the industry for quite a bit since 2003, I believe.
That's beautiful. What a great resume, you know. So I guess you did touch on it on a little bit, but I mean, what made you interested in learning about filmmaking? Could you dive in that a little bit more?
I think specifically it happened whenever three movies came out in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those movies were Boys in the Hood, Meet
Mm-hmm.
Society, and I'll throw in there New Jack City, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early 90s, those movies expressed some realities that were happening uh, in predominantly neighborhoods where we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
The ills, unfortunate, of racism, injustice,
Mm-hmm.
inequality, where African Americans were, as well as Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of other movies came out, like Colors, um, films that kind of depicted what I was seeing in my environment. And so um, gangs influenced my environment. Gangs influenced the environment
Mm-hmm.
based on the films that people were watching. So when
Mm-hmm.
New Jack City came out, there was a gang that formed called New Jack Hustlers in my middle school, and they
Right.
went and they would try to beat up everybody who was not black. So
Wow.
I never thought that it had anything to do with me, but the day they tried to come at me because I'm Latino, I defended myself and I ended up beating up the gang leader. And so, based out of people's
Out of
Uh,
self-defense, of course.
yeah, out of self-defense. Yeah, he did get me, out of nowhere, and I defended myself. I ended up beating this guy up, and so I was 13 years old. I mean,
Hmm.
I just thought I was doing the right thing by self-defense. But the majority of Latinos that had been, beaten up just using the restroom, jumped like this, they saw that I stood up
Yeah.
to what they were facing, and so all of a sudden there was a misunderstanding that I was a leader of a Latino gang. And
Hmm.
so and I mean, I ended up being a leader of a gang here in Houston, Texas, where I live.
Hmm.
And I think what happened then led to a lot of chapters in life that I was like, man, this is even better than a movie. And so later on, once I learned filmmaking, I was like, man, people influenced us possibly negatively. I'd like to influence positively and try to utilize
Hmm.
the same means to be able to impact people's lives.
Okay, so that kind of segues into the next question. I guess what. Well, okay, I mean, you kind of touched on it again, but like the inclination to use this medium of film as an influence to do good. Like, what? Why did you? I mean, you saw that all this negativity was happening for so long. Why do you feel like it was your responsibility to use it for good?
So there's a saying, right, that the pen is mightier than the sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when people use a pen, they can use it in a vile way to destroy other people's, I don't know, history or perspective as to who they are. But then there's
Mm-hmm.
people who can uplift with that same pen. So I looked at media in the same way. It's a medium of
Mm-hmm.
communication. So when September 11th happened, I was Muslim 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asked by the leadership of the city, the Muslim leadership, to speak in front of the cameras about Islam, why I became Muslim in the Spanish language.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was all by myself because nobody could even give me feedback as to whether I did a good job or didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was 23 years old at that time. My girlfriend, who I looked into Islam with, she became Muslim a week later, and we got
Mm-hmm.
married a month later. That's
Mashallah.
that's my wife today, and we have 3 children. So I knew I didn't want to be one of the Muslims that was going to be depicted by the media in a very limited way. And
Mm-hmm.
when they asked me questions that put me in a predicament as to how I needed to answer, and when
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Muslims and asked them, what's going on with the media? How come they're asking this? How come they're doing that? They were like, oh, the media is negative. They want to portray us like this, etc. And so I was asking myself, how come you don't use the same means? And then not only, I don't mean to defend yourself, I mean to represent who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's why I went and studied media. And my wife, who I mentioned, she went and studied alongside with me. We both enrolled at the Art Institute of Houston. We graduated with honors. And during
Beautiful.
the time, man, whenever we were in there, that's when she actually drew up the logo. She did graphic design, so she designed the
Mm-hmm.
logo of Islam in Spanish. I
Mm-hmm.
I produced the very first audio CD called "The Religion of Truth" in the Spanish language, in one
Yes.
of the audio engineering rooms. So all these projects that were coming out of us going to school for media were in response to the times and people misunderstanding who the Muslims were and what
Mm-hmm.
Islam really was about. And I think that was a segue for us to build an institution or organization that's global now.
That's so beautiful, mashallah, just to hear the story. I mean, I'm familiar with the organization. I've worked alongside you and the brothers, and mashallah, y'all doing amazing work with Islam in Spanish. For everybody who is watching, if y'all have any questions regarding Islam in Spanish or anything like that, make sure you leave a comment in the live chat so I can take a look and we can answer it, or I can send them over to Brother Mujahid as well. And Brother Mujahid, if you can do me just a quick technical favor and just make sure you are scooched over just a little bit to your right because you're a little bit out of the frame. Just a
Gotcha.
smidge. That's it.
Gotcha.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that's beautiful, and I love that you're doing that. So, um, I guess Islam in Spanish is the biggest initiative that you've taken upon yourself, and you've reached out into your community. What impact has that alone made?
Whenever we started Islam in Spanish, um, even though it was amidst a very turbulent time, September 11th, it really started with the intent to be able to educate our family members because they thought we made the wrong choice by becoming Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
My mother thought I was brainwashed because I stopped drinking and smoking and going out with
Mm-hmm.
girls. And My
breaking the
dad,
cultural norms.
exactly. So my dad, he began reading up on it, but it was very foreign. But when September 11th happened, I mean, it kind of sped up the process of us having to refine how we communicate, not
Hmm.
only to our family members, but the, what is it, almost 18% of the US population that's
Hmm.
Latinos and growing, right? So we wanted to communicate about why we chose Islam and what it did for us in our lives. And we didn't want to
Hmm.
convert people. We
Right.
didn't mean to like preach. I didn't like to be preached to. I
Hmm.
just felt that I didn't have access to this information growing up. Why not make this available for people who speak our language, who may be like my parents and
Yes.
others like myself? And so I think I was like the prototype. Like, man, when I was growing up, if I'd have known this, I wouldn't have possibly done that.
Yeah.
And so we ended up producing over 450 television shows, more than 500 audiobooks. We produced the entire Quran in the Spanish language and audio
Hmm.
at a time where people didn't even have access. I mean, this is before social media, right?
Right.
So, I mean, once social media came in, I mean, we were already, um, literate enough as an organization to then spread literacy. And
Hmm.
so we've ended up speaking, as on media panels on CNN in Spanish,
Hmm.
been featured by National Geographic, the BBC, and now we own the only Latino-led Islamic center in America. And in about 4 years, I think we've had about 350 people embrace Islam,
MashaAllah.
just in our locality. I mean, away from people embracing Islam with us online,
Hmm.
away from, I don't know, so many people, even if they don't embrace Islam, at least they have the message.
Hmm.
And that's really our duty, right? Just to be able to convey, "Balaghu anni walau aya," convey from me, even if it's one verse. And
Right, and
so
that's a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be
I
upon
say
him.
another Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I think that so many Muslims have more than one verse.
Of course.
And I found that the Muslims, if they would have been informing the people before I became Muslim, it
Hmm.
maybe would not have been as challenging of a task when
Hmm.
I became Muslim, because I was like, how come nobody ever told me about this? And then I began giving khutbas locally and
Hmm.
learning some of the Arabic language. I mean, eventually I went and studied in Egypt,
Hmm.
in Saudi Arabia sometime, and so on. But what happens is, when I was communicating to the audience, I would see some guys that I went to high school with. I mean, guys that were doing the same exact things I was doing when I was in Muslim.
Right.
Or if they weren't doing those things, I mean, I was like, how come you guys never told me about Islam? So I
Hmm.
think we've taken that honesty into the work. And when we produce media nowadays, I mean, we're talking about stories of people who are getting kicked out of their houses because they became Muslim.
Yeah.
Um, there was a young lady, she took Shahada over there in Dallas
Hmm.
last year. She found us on a Vice documentary, walked
Hmm.
into our center over there and became Muslim all by herself. We never even met her. She
Hmm.
just walked in, and she was 16 years old at that time. And
Wow.
just this last Friday, we opened up for the first Juma, and a 14-year-old girl from the neighborhood where I grew up walked into our center here in Houston and accepted Islam. So
Wow.
it's happening so much, and I think our people are so ready because we have a lot of the history from El Andalus, Muslim
Yes.
Spain. And so whenever we tell that story that, hey, maybe our ancestors were Muslim, maybe we didn't know, similar to African Americans not knowing that their ancestors could have been Muslim, but because of the
Yes.
slave trade, they were cut off in their history.
Yeah.
For us, we were cut off because of the Inquisition, you
Yes.
know, and
Similar
that
histories.
history, similar history. We grew up in the similar, environments,
Hmm.
and a lot of the social issues that are faced by both groups.
Hmm.
You know, I've experienced that, man, and all we do is just speak, hopefully based on our experience, and others can gravitate. But we see Islam as an answer to so
Hmm.
much. I mean, Malcolm X would have turned 95, just a few days ago.
Hmm. Yeah.
Rahimahullah, and he went when he went to Mecca. He said, I mean, what he saw from people who had fair skin. If people here in America knew about Islam,
Yeah.
it may be a means to end racism. That's a long time ago, man. And we're over
Absolutely.
here, you know what I mean? Like, so I think we're just the people. I mean, just like Malcolm X, I'm a person who was unaware, became aware, and then we feel like we just want to, right some wrongs that we found in society. So we see
Hmm.
Islam as a tool to improve one's life. Want to share that with
Absolutely.
people. Media is a
Yes.
great way.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, like you touched on it. Like first it was traditional film and, producing content, on tape, CD, DVD, and, distribute. But then with the boom of social media, then it became somewhat much easier to distribute. And then, of course, with the complexity of algorithms and things like that, you have to start, pouring money into it so they can be seen, for that worldwide distribution, which is phenomenal. To have that kind of reach. Ooh, okay. I think we have an issue there. Sorry, everybody. We just had a. I think he caught off for just a second. Let me just get him back real quick. Apologies in advance, but if y'all would like to see what's happening on Islam in Spanish, then make sure you click the link in the description below. I don't have it right now, but if you're watching the replay, it will be there in the description. Check out Islam in Spanish. So, Brother Mujahid just came back. Let me just fix that real quick. If I can bring him in, brother, can I have you rotate your camera again, please? Can I have you rotate your camera? There we go. Okay. Yes, sir. All right. Let me. Okay, everybody. Here we go. We're gonna bring him back. There he is. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Anyway, uh, like we were saying, Islam uh, hitting home for people, and Islam is a key or is a potential to end racism, right? It's within our own teachings that it can do that for any community, right? And I think what you all are doing with Islam in Spanish is remarkable. I'm a big supporter of that. Um, so let's kind of transition a little bit to make it into our current situation with all that is happening since the death of George Floyd. How has the media played a role in creating change or at least putting out information?
I remember the LA riots, back in 91, 92, when the Rodney
Hmm.
King beating happened. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Kind of freezing up a bit. Okay, kind of freezing up a bit. So, um, back in the early 90s, there were rap groups that were coming out with songs
Hmm.
discussing the inequalities that were happening in the neighborhoods. And if it wasn't for those sort of groups, like NWA and Tupac and so many of these guys,
Hmm.
there was no real representation as to what was being seen in the inner cities. And people thought that that music was violent, but it's because it was expressing the violence that was happening in the neighborhoods.
Hmm.
And so, whenever someone with a little camcorder, you know, I guess they used tape back in the days.
DV tape. Yep.
I mean, this may have even be before DVD tape. Maybe this was
Right. Right.
VHS tape back in
VHS.
'91, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so somebody had a camcorder at the time when Rodney King was being beat by, I believe, 5 or 6 police officers, in
Hmm.
LA, and the footage captured, him not resisting arrest, and he was beat so bad. I mean, when you see his images, there was like no way that these police officers could be acquitted, from that crime because
Hmm.
they beat him so
It was
long,
evident. It was evident.
and it was evident. But yet, whenever they went to court, they were all acquitted. And I remember there were songs that have come out from groups such as NWA, talking about the police. They made that an anthem as they went
Hmm.
and looted the streets and rioted. And what's sad to see is that whenever these riots happen, if they think that the system is oppressing them, and they think it's about race, they usually don't go into the white neighborhoods to damage them. They
Hmm.
actually damage their own neighborhood.
Right.
So it's a very interesting thing, right? People will loot and steal, and that's their neighborhood, So Watts and LA, it took so much to try to get it up to a certain level, but here we
Hmm.
are almost 30 years, right? And people are not at the disadvantage of not being able to film. Now everybody can film because of, what I mean, the phone, right? Anybody has a
Right.
cell phone, they
Yep.
film. So now there's a lot more awareness about this issue. The
Hmm.
unfortunate thing is that 30 years ago, even though that incident was caught and they were acquitted, maybe you could say, well, there's not too much footage that shows that that's apparent all the time. But
Hmm.
now, when regular people are filming, and it becomes raw footage. I mean, this is
Yep.
not edited, right? That you just
Right.
kind of share. People begin to see the amount of the same, right? In
Yep.
different ways. I mean, sometimes, someone will get shot. Sometimes it's, civilians doing the shooting, like what
Hmm.
happened in Atlanta, recently. And then sometimes it's police officers. And honestly, I grew up in a neighborhood. I mean, Alif. It was in the early 90s, it was rough. And I remember, being treated by police in a way that was excessive, in regards
Hmm.
to their authority. And by the time I grew up, man, before I was Muslim, actually, when I was about 22 years old, like a year before I became Muslim,
Hmm.
um, outside of a club, there was a huge fight, and I was missed a huge fight, like 20 against 20, and a police officer came with full force, and hit me with a flashlight
Hmm.
across the back of my head, and he could have killed me. I out, and I didn't even know I was knocked out. But the people who I was with, they
Hmm.
screamed towards the police officer and said, "You killed him! You killed him!" But he had his knee on my back, and he was about to hit me again. Meaning, if the people didn't scream, "You killed him," he possibly would have hit me again and possibly continued hitting me. And so when I snapped out of it and got up, I didn't even know what happened. And I remember taking off my shirt and I put it on my head because I was, it was gushing blood. And
Yeah.
I went after this police officer trying to get his badge number. And he ran into his car and left.
Hmm.
And then I went after another police officer. Hey, give me your badge number. They all got in their cars and left.
Right.
So this before being Muslim, right? So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna sue the police department. And I remember going and trying to do this, man, and it was no way to do any of that, man. It was just like, you don't have
My word
anything,
versus
no,
his word.
yeah, no evidence, no this, no that, right? Who
Hmm.
knows if it would have been back in those? I mean, like if we would have had phones like back in those days,
Hmm.
who my situation could have been, right, the raw footage of somebody, what I
Yeah.
mean, shooting it. So now I think the ability for people to become eyewitnesses and reporters as regular individuals
Yeah.
goes on to amplify the essence of what it really means to have freedom of expressing through free press,
Hmm.
right? Freedom of speech. That is important. And I think technology has taken us to that point. So it's different now. And people are just going to have to be more wise about what they do when they see the images because,
Hmm.
if they're going to go back to their neighborhoods and destroy their own neighborhoods, got to ask the question if that's the answer. Or are they going to have to do something more systemic to make a change and utilize media even more
Hmm.
wisely in order to be able to make a change? And I do think it's a great means to do that.
Hmm. So I mean, it's like we have these powerful tools within our fingertips, right, in our own pocket, right, to go live when something is happening, and so that there is clear evidence of whatever it is, right. But then you have to have somebody to report, to give the full picture, and then with that comes a great responsibility to make sure that you're telling the truth and not spreading lies, because unfortunately in times like this when people are getting on the edge, they're being anxious a lot of times. Videos are circling around. It's like, oh, when is this, what is that, what is, like, it's just like you just open up social media now and you're just flooded with the same types of videos over and over, and it's hard to filter out what is true, what is not, what is staged, and like it's hard to come to a conclusion, And so I feel like there is a major responsibility that needs to be accounted for when capturing these types of events. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the same thing happened whenever the advent of the printing press happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people were afraid that, hey, if people can just, duplicate, what they write, what if they
Mm-hmm.
write, things that are not true,
Yeah.
right? And so, but you see, I mean, not only is there Barnes and Noble offline, but now online, Amazon became,
Yeah.
so books are going to be written by people, and truth will always be a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be the absolute truth, right?
Yeah.
Some people will side with someone's perspective and others. So now what we're going to need as a people, and I've actually taught this since 2013, um, basic courses on media literacy.
Mm-hmm.
People need to learn how to read media and how to produce media.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the days, if people didn't know how to read and write, they were at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Now, people don't know how to read and write media, so they're at a
Yep.
disadvantage.
Yep.
So they don't know how to read the media properly. I can look at a link, that somebody else looks at, and they may have a totally different perception in regards to how they're analyzing it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my dad's 76 years old, and he's now seeing things on Facebook and stuff, and sometimes I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, man, that's not, that's a video for an ad, man, trying to get you to buy this.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's he's like, oh, look. It's so they make everything out to be, and I mean, I'll say we make out, what I mean, things to be representative of whatever we want to express, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whenever we're producing something, we may say, I have the, responsibility to edit and, to say the truth. But then the truth becomes relevant to
Mm-hmm.
the individual. Because whenever
Mm-hmm.
we put our videos out there, somebody may disagree totally and be like, that's far from the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so those discussions that then can be had afterwards, if we don't have that human touch, if we don't have that offline face-to-face
Mm-hmm.
relationship where you can sit down, drink coffee with somebody,
Yeah.
like media is not going to lead towards the best of communication amongst people. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of one-way messages being zapped all over the place, and you may
Yeah.
get hit here and you may get hit there. But when you look at people, you don't even know how to look at them anymore because it's just oversaturated how things are being portrayed. So people who can get through this, man, are people who can learn how to read it, analyze it, and
Mm-hmm.
then be able to, look at what spin is, look at, what I mean, what exaggeration is, how Photoshop, what I mean, can change a sign to say this or that based on
Yep.
someone's, and the same thing with deep fake videos now. I mean, you got
Yep.
people, deep fakes, right? A lot of people don't even know that exists. You know what I mean? You can now have your
Mm-hmm.
lips move with the face of, anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to get more challenging to be able to see through this new reality, of how to read media. And if we can produce media, I mean, I tell my daughters, you got to learn how to produce, man, your own message. If not, you're just going to
Yep.
be a consumer of other people's message.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you so much. One, before we wrap up, just off the cuff, any advice you have for any aspiring producer, filmmaker, creative, individual artist? What do you have to say to them in times like this?
Man, the best advice always for art is to be true to yourself. I found that stands the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
If you produce something to be liked by people, um, you're gonna be different today than you will be in a week, and you will look back and say, "Well, a month ago I was saying something totally different."
Mm-hmm.
So if you change with the current affairs and the times based on what's quote unquote hot, right, or what people want to
Trends.
see, trends, then you're gonna end up being like a chameleon, You won't like my my dad has a good expression when he can't define someone. He says, "Are they a fish or are they water?"
Mm.
I can't tell. So there's a lot of people that are wishy-washy. They're in and out. They'll post up whenever they look good doing something because, hey, you know what? Might as well talk about this. Everybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you stay true to yourself, you do things that are different than what the masses are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even if people disagree with it, even if people dislike it, even if people ignore it, as long as you're true to who you are, it's not about what you produce or what you make. It's about the journey of who you become.
Mm-hmm.
And the best artists that I've been able to meet, I mean, I'm part of an organization in Hollywood called
Mm-hmm.
NALIP, National Association of Latino Independent Producers. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been able to sit down with like Robert Rodriguez,
Mm-hmm.
he made Dust to Dawn, he created Desperado, I mean, Zorro, the
Yes.
Mask of Zorro. So I mean, he created his first film with $700, man, in a little
Yep.
town in Mexico called El Mariachi. It was in Spanish.
Yep.
Before that, he believed so much in this film that he became like a lab rat. He didn't have no money, and he just went. They did some testing on him of medicine that may not even do well for his body, but that's how he generated his money to go. And he filmed on one street. Like the footage is shot in one direction or in another direction, but it looks like it's two sidewalks.
Hmm.
And because of the creativity and the passion he had, he ended up being who he is now. And when I heard him speaking about launching a network called El Rey Network that eventually partnered with Univision, um,
Hmm.
they're producing content for second generation Latino English speakers.
Right.
So that's a very unique niche, right? When he was
Hmm.
doing that, Univision is still talking to Spanish speakers, people like my parents who came from overseas.
Hmm.
I mean, whatever, if it's Latin America or if it's Spain. But what about people like me who grew up here? You know what I mean? And I know the American way of life and I don't have an accent.
Hmm.
Um, he started producing for those people. When something is so uniquely different, someone can always stand up and become a naysayer and say, nobody does that.
Hmm.
But when you're original to who you are and you feel like, you know what, I feel passionate about this needed to be said or this needed to be produced or this needed to be
Hmm.
done. I mean, I went through the same thing with Islam and Spanish. A lot of our Muslim community that we thought should have been siding with Islam and Spanish. I mean, they were
Yeah.
they were closing the door on us sometimes, saying, "Oh, this is
Hmm.
separatist. You guys are trying to break off from the general Muslim community." And we're like, "We're not. We're part of you. What do you mean? Like you had to talk to these people. Let us speak to them. Can we just invite them here for an open house? Oh, well, you
Yeah.
have to get approval from so and so has to get approval from so and so. So what
Yeah.
did we do? We ended up raising our own funds to produce our own messaging and buy our own place.
Hmm.
And now we can't be kicked out of anywhere.
Yeah.
So we stay true to who we were. And guess what? If you stay true to that, like we believe, right? God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, Allah, He's going to send people
Hmm.
that believe the way you do, and He will send helpers. And those people will join you. Different
Yeah.
sizes, different colors, different backgrounds, different skills. But if it's worthy enough, it will withstand the test of time. And honesty and doing what you believe is that's the only way to go. Otherwise, it'll be a fly-by thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope anybody who creates art, anybody who produces something, they
Hmm.
just gotta be who they are, man, and stick with that. Adjust, learn, change. But you gotta believe in something, man, and stand by that. And when you're wrong, all right, well, I gave that a try, man. I was wrong, and I found out better, and let me go ahead and produce something based on that, because now I see it
Hmm.
this way. But at least trying to be authentic, man, is can't go wrong with that.
Beautiful, beautiful message, brother Mujahid. Thank you so much for joining us on Real Time, and I will get back to you in just a second. Thank you again so much.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, thank you. All right, guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this episode of Real Time. If y'all did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you hit that post notification down below. And if you want to check out Islam in Spanish, again, it'll be on the replay. The link will be in the description to see their work and support them. They're doing amazing, amazing work, reaching out to others. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I will see y'all in the next one. This is Mustafa Talib with Cinema King Productions, signing off. Peace out.